The first thing I remember clearly is sitting in my truck in the trailhead parking lot with my hands on the steering wheel and no memory of how I got there. That sounds like the kind of thing a person says to be dramatic. I wish it was. I've thought about it every day since it happened. And what I can piece together from the physical evidence and the one memory that came back to me about a week later in a dream, so vivid it woke me up gasping, is this. I was on that ridgeline for somewhere between 18 and 22 hours. I have clear memories of about 6 of them. The rest is not darkness exactly, more like a door that won't open all the way. I can see light under it. I know there's something on the other side. I can't get it open. My name is Wade. I'm 32. I've been hiking the Red River Gorge area of Kentucky since I was old enough to convince my dad to drive me there on weekends, which was around age 14. If you've never been to the gorge, it's about an hour east of Lexington. Red River cuts through it, and the terrain is unlike anything else in the state. Sandstone cliffs, some of them dropping hundreds of feet, arches, narrow ridge trails with exposure on both sides. It's serious country, even though it doesn't look serious on a map. People get in trouble out there every season. I thought I knew it well enough to avoid that category. This was November, a Friday. I took a route I'd done the first half of before, but never completed end to end, a loop that took me up to a ridgeline section with good camping, then back down the next day. My girlfriend Faye had the location shared on her phone. I told her I'd check in by 8 that evening, standard. I was at the ridgeline camp spot by 3 in the afternoon, plenty of light. The spot was good, a flat section of trail about 40 feet long where the sandstone widened slightly, trees on both sides, the gorge falling away steeply to the left. I'd been there once before, years ago, and it was exactly as I remembered it. I got the tent up, ate filtered water from a seep coming out of the cliff face about a quarter mile back, everything routine. I checked in with Faye at 8, told her the camp was good, told her I'd check in again at 7 in the morning. Here is where my memory gets reliable, and then stops being reliable. I remember lying in the tent around 9:30 with the headlamp on, reading on my phone. I remember turning the phone off and closing my eyes. I remember the usual sounds of the gorge at night wind up on the ridgeline is different than wind in the valley. It has a specific pitch coming across the exposed sandstone that I've always found almost musical. I remember thinking as I fell asleep, this is exactly right. This is the place. And then the truck, my hands on the steering wheel, daylight, rain on the windshield, my pack in the back seat, my tent wet and folded but not stuffed into its bag the way I always pack it, just folded loosely, like someone had grabbed it and folded it fast. My boots on my feet but untied, and a feeling in my body, not pain exactly, more like the exhausted wrong feeling you have after you've been sick or after a very long cry, like something had been through me. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes trying to understand what I was looking at. The clock on my truck said 6:48 a.m. That was roughly consistent with leaving camp at first light. But I had no memory of waking up, no memory of breaking camp, no memory of the 4 miles of trail between the ridgeline and the parking area, nothing. A gap where 9 or 10 hours should have been. I called Faye. She answered on the first ring, which told me she'd been awake. I said, "I'm at the truck." She said, "Thank God you didn't check in this morning." I said, "I know. I don't know why. I'm okay." I said that because it seemed true. I was physically intact. I had all my gear. Nothing appeared to be wrong with me except that I had a bruise on my right palm I couldn't account for and about 10 hours of missing time. I drove home. I didn't tell Faye the full story on the phone. I told her I'd overslept and hiked out fast. I'm not sure why I lied. Something about the parking lot, about the folded tent and the untied boots, told me this was not a story I understood well enough yet to tell out loud. The photograph was on my phone. I didn't notice it until that evening when I was going through my camera roll looking for the pictures I'd taken of the view from the ridgeline. There were pictures I'd taken Friday afternoon, everything normal, the view, the tent going up, the seep in the cliff. And then, after a gap, after the normal pictures stopped, 4 photographs, time-stamped 2:17 a.m., all 4 taken in the same direction, at the cliff face above the trail, the sandstone wall that rose about 15 feet above the ridgeline path on the right side of where I'd camped. The first photo was bad, blurry, low light, clearly taken by someone whose hands weren't entirely steady. The second one was better. The third was focused. The fourth was the one I had to set my phone down after looking at. Carved into the sandstone, fresh cuts in the rock, pale against the darker, weathered surface. The kind of cuts that had to have been made with something metal, and made recently. The weathering on the old rock versus the brightness of the cuts was completely different. A pattern, not random, a specific, intentional pattern of lines and shapes covering about a 4-foot section of the cliff face, starting at ground level and going up as high as a person standing could reach. Geometric, but not in any geometry, I recognized. Deliberate and dense, and covering every inch of that 4-foot section. I had taken these photographs at 2:17 in the morning. I had no memory of waking up. I had no memory of taking them. I spent the next 3 days running through explanations, sleepwalking. I've never sleepwalked in my life, not once, but it's possible. Dissociation from altitude or dehydration. The ridgeline was high but not extreme, and I'd been careful with water. Medication interaction. I take nothing that would do this. I kept arriving at the same problem. Whatever caused the missing time, I had been awake enough at 2 in the morning to get out of the tent, walk to the cliff face, and take 4 photographs of carvings I had apparently identified as worth documenting. Something in whatever state I was in had understood that the carvings mattered. The memory came back on the 9th day. In a dream, which I know sounds unreliable, but it came with the specific quality that only certain dreams have. The ones where you wake up certain that what you experienced was real. Not imagined, retrieved. I was standing at the cliff face, the headlamp was on, I was looking at the carvings, and I understood, in the way of dreams, where understanding arrives whole and without explanation, that I hadn't found them in the night. I had watched them being made. I had stood there in the dark on that ridgeline and watched something carve those marks into the sandstone in the light of my headlamp, working quickly and without pause, and I had watched it for I don't know how long. Long enough, in the dream I couldn't see what was making them, only the marks appearing. Only the sound of it, which I can describe, rhythmic, patient, the sound of rock being worked by something harder than rock. I went back to the gorge the following Saturday in daylight with Faye. I told her the real version of the story on the drive. She said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "Do the carvings match the photos?" I said I wanted to check. She said she was coming with me. They matched. The section of cliff face was exactly as photographed, exactly as the dream had shown them. The cuts were fresh, pale in the center, with the color of old weathering, only at the very edges where moisture had already started working, made recently, made the night I was there. There was an old man near the trailhead when we left, sitting on the tailgate of a truck that had been there when we arrived. He had that settled mountain Kentucky look that tells you a person has spent their whole life in one piece of geography. He looked at us coming off the trail and said, "Up on the ridge?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Camping?" I said, "We'd just gone up to look at something." He nodded. And then I don't know what made me do it. Some instinct, I showed him one of the photographs on my phone, the 4th one, the focused one. He looked at it for a long time, not surprised, considering. He said, "How long were you up there?" I told him overnight Friday. He handed the phone back and said, "You're lucky you came down." I asked him what he meant. He said, "Those marks, they go back a long way up there. Every time somebody comes down and shows me something new, the marks have grown." He paused. "It's been a long time since anybody came down who saw them fresh." I asked what that meant. He looked at me with the specific expression of someone who is deciding how much to give. Then he said, "The ones who saw them made aren't usually the ones who come down." I didn't ask anything else. Faye's hand was in my arm, and I could feel how tight she was holding. We got in the truck. I have not gone back to that ridgeline. I've hiked other parts of the gorge. I think about the 10 missing hours. I think about what I was doing while I stood at that cliff face watching something work in the light of my own headlamp. I think about the folded tent and the untied boots and the bruise on my palm that came from somewhere I can't account for. And I think about the old man's last sentence, "The ones who saw them made aren't usually the ones who come down." I came down. I don't know why I was the exception. I don't know what I agreed to in those 10 hours that I can't remember, or what was agreed on my behalf while whatever part of me that makes decisions was somewhere else entirely. I check my phone's camera roll every morning when I wake up, not for any rational reason, just to make sure there are no photographs time-stamped in the middle of the night, taken in a direction I don't remember pointing my phone. There never are, not yet. I have gone back and forth about whether to tell this story because Sloane is still my friend. Not the way she was before, not the way people are friends when they've been friends for 10 years and know every version of each other. A different kind of friend now, careful. At a distance I maintain without explaining it to her, a distance she has never asked me to explain, which is its own answer to a question I haven't asked out loud. We are friends in the way that two people are friends. When one of them knows something about the other, that changed the terms of everything, and they've both agreed not to name it. This is the story about what happened at Cave Run Lake in September, and specifically about what happened to Sloane on the second night and who she was when she came back from the water. Four of us, me, my name is Bryn, and my boyfriend Cole, and our friends Sloane and Tanner, who'd been together about 2 years. 3 nights, Labor Day weekend, car camping at a site on Cave Run Lake in Moorhead. Cave Run is a reservoir in eastern Kentucky, about 1,200 acres of water cut through with inlets and coves, forested to the edge everywhere. One of those places that is genuinely beautiful in the way only water in forest is beautiful. That particular combination of open sky above and wilderness right to the shoreline. We'd done a long weekend there once before, the four of us, 2 years prior, and it had been perfect enough that we'd been trying to get back ever since. We pulled in Friday afternoon. The site we'd reserved was a good one on a small rocky point. The lake on 2 sides, trees at our back, enough room for the 4 tents with space between them. We'd been looking forward to this for months. The food was good, the weather held. The first night was a masterclass in what car camping is supposed to be. Big fire, late night, that particular ease that comes when 4 people who genuinely like each other are somewhere comfortable and there is nowhere any of them has to be. Saturday was swimming and kayaking and eating too much and the particular happiness of having nothing to do and nowhere to be. Tanner and Cole took the kayaks out in the afternoon. Sloane and I sat on the rocks at the water's edge and talked for 3 hours, the way we've been able to talk since college. I want you to know that about her before I tell you the rest. She was my best friend. The specific kind where you can say anything. I need that context to land for the rest of this to make sense. Saturday night was perfect, right up until it wasn't. Around 11, after the fire had burned down to coals, and we were all in that comfortable half-asleep state that comes from a day in the sun and the warm, Sloane said she was going to walk down to the water. We were maybe 50 feet from the lake shore. She said she wanted to look at the moon on the water before she slept. That is completely in keeping with who Sloane is. She says things like that. She notices things like that. Nobody went with her. Cole was already nearly asleep. Tanner said, "Sure, babe," and closed his eyes. I watched her walk down the slope of rock toward the water's edge and disappear into the dark at the edge of the firelight, and then I fell asleep. I woke up at 2:40. I know the time because I checked my phone when I opened my eyes. For no reason I could have named then. Just woke up and looked at the time. The fire was completely out. Tanner was asleep outside his tent in a camp chair. Cole had moved into the tent at some point. And Sloane, I looked toward her tent and the door was unzipped and I could tell from the look of it that nobody was inside. I got up. I don't know why I didn't call her name immediately, some instinct. I walked to the shore. The lake was completely still at that hour, the moon high and full, the water like a mirror, and Sloane was standing in it. Not on the shore, in the water, about knee-deep, maybe 30 feet out from the rocky edge, standing completely still, facing the center of the lake, her back to me, wearing exactly what she'd been wearing at the fire shorts and a camp shirt, her arms at her sides, perfectly motionless. The water around her was undisturbed, as still as if she was a post sunk in the lake bed rather than a person standing in it. I stood on the shore for a moment and said her name, normal voice. Sloane. She turned around immediately, and something about the speed of it, not startled, not slow, but exactly timed, like someone responding to a cue, made me take a step back before I knew I was doing it. She looked at me, smiled, walked out of the water toward the shore. "Hey," she said, couldn't sleep. Her voice was exactly her voice. Her face was her face. The smile was her smile. I have spent months trying to put my finger on what was wrong, and the closest I can come is this. Everything was correct, and nothing was right. The individual components, voice, face, expression, words, were all accurate. The overall impression was of something that had assembled the components from memory and had assembled them correctly, but couldn't fully account for what animated them when they were real. Like a photograph of Sloan doing the smile, rather than Sloan smiling. I said, "How long have you been out there?" She said, "Just a few minutes." She wrung water out of the hem of her shirt, and we walked back to the fire ring together, and she went into her tent, and I went into mine and lay in my sleeping bag in the dark and stared at the tent, ceiling, and thought, something is wrong with my friend. And then I thought, you're tired, and it was dark, and you startled her, and it was the weird light. And I let myself believe that because it was late and she was right there, and the alternative was not something I had a plan for. The next morning, Sunday, Sloan was Sloan, or close to it. The specific difference I noticed, she kept asking questions she already knew the answers to. Small ones. What are you taking your coffee? She knew. We'd camped together a dozen times. Does Cole sleep on the left or the right? She knew. She'd stayed with us. Not disoriented questions, specific ones asked with the particular focus of someone memorizing answers. Each time she asked one, she listened to the answer with a quality of attention that was just slightly more than the question warranted, like it was information she was cataloging rather than something she already knew and had just temporarily forgotten. Cole thought she was just still half asleep. Tanner didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't say. I watched all day. I counted 6 questions she shouldn't have needed to ask. I said nothing. Sunday night, around the fire, Tanner asked Sloan about her sister Bex, who we'd all spent a weekend with at Easter, who Sloan talked about constantly. Sloan paused, then said, "Remind me, which one is Bex?" Tanner laughed, said, "Your only sister." Sloan laughed too and said she was losing her mind from too much sun. I stopped sleeping that night, not from fear, exactly from the specific hypervigilance of someone trying to prove themselves wrong. I lay awake cataloging every interaction, the night sounds over the lake, Sloan's tent, which I'd positioned myself to see from mine. At about 1 a.m, her tent unzipped. I lay still and watched through the mesh of my own door. She walked to the shore. Same thing, went into the water up to her knees, stood there, facing out, still. I watched for about 20 minutes. She didn't move. The lake didn't move around her. Whatever was standing in Cave Run Lake at 1 a.m. in my best friend's body stood there for 20 full minutes and then walked out of the water and back to the tent and zipped it shut and didn't come out again. We drove home Monday morning. I sat in the back with Sloan and watched her the whole drive. She was good, warm, funny, the way she's always been funny. Asked real questions, engaged with the conversation. By the time we pulled into Lexington, I had nearly convinced myself that I'd constructed a problem from a combination of weird light and sleep deprivation and the specific anxiety of almost but not quite recognizing yourself in a friend. That happens, I know it happens. 3 weeks after the trip, Sloan and I met for coffee. Halfway through it, she said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Of course." She said, "At the lake, did you see me in the water?" Pause. I said, "Yes." I said she'd startled me. She looked at her coffee cup. Then she said, "I don't remember going in either night. I remember going to the shore to look at the moon, and then I remember being back in my tent." She paused. Both nights, I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked her the question that I'd been holding for 3 weeks. "Do you remember your sister's name?" She looked at me, long enough that I got the answer before she gave it. Then she said, "Bex." Of course I remember Bex. And she smiled, and the smile was right, and the name was right, and she took a long sip of her coffee and changed the subject. And I have not asked her anything like that since. We are still friends. The careful kind. The kind where I watch her hands when she doesn't know I'm watching. The kind where I catalog the questions she asks and note whether they're questions she should know the answers to. So far, mostly fine. Mostly the Sloan. I know, but there are nights, not many, but some, when she says something that lands a half second late, like an echo, and I think about Cave Run Lake at 1 a.m, and the water perfectly still around her, and the way she stood there with everything correct and nothing right. And I think about whatever came out of that lake when I called her name and walked back up the shore to the fire with me, and I think about what went in. I don't know the answer. I don't know if there is one. What I know is that my best friend stood in a lake in the dark for 20 minutes and came back asking which one was her sister, and she says she doesn't remember going in, and I believe her. I believe she doesn't remember, I'm just not entirely sure that she is the one who needs to remember. I'm going to tell this in the order I understood it, not the order it happened. Because the order it happened stretches back 3 generations. And if I start at the beginning, I'll spend half the time on things my grandfather knew and my father half knew and I learned by accident, and the shape of the story will get lost. Better to start with me standing at the edge of the bottom field on my family's land on a November morning, holding my grandfather's 30-06 and understanding for the first time what I was actually standing at the edge of. My name is Slade. I'm 47 years old. My family has owned and worked about 200 acres of eastern Kentucky hill country in Magoffin County since my grandfather bought it in 1951. Mixed land, some pasture, some cropland in the early years, heavy timber on the ridges, and the creek hollow at the back of the property that runs along the south boundary line for about 3/4 of a mile before the property ends and the national forest begins. My grandfather Corbett worked the land until he died. My father Harlan worked it until his knees gave out and then leased the fields to a neighbor and just kept the house and hunted the hollow in season. When Harlan died 2 Novembers ago, the land came to me. Harlan and I had a complicated relationship, the kind that forms between men who love each other but never learned the words for it, and so expressed it mostly in proximity, working the same ground, hunting the same hollow, sitting in the same kitchen without having to fill the silence. When he died, it was sudden heart, the way it often is, and there was a lot left unsaid, and I have been making a kind of peace with that unsaidness for 2 years now. The November I'm going to tell you about was my first season hunting the hollow without him. I want to tell you about the hollow first because it's the heart of this. The creek bottom is about 50 feet lower than the fields at the back of the property, reached by a path that drops steeply through a hedgerow and into the old-growth timber that my grandfather never cut. Massive sycamore and oak and beech, some of them 4 feet across. The kind of trees that tell you a place has been left alone for longer than anyone remembers. The creek runs clear, except in spring, and there are flat, sandy sections where deer come to drink that I've been hunting since I was old enough to sit still. I know that hollow the way you know a room you've spent a significant portion of your life in. Every route and crossing and stand location, I could navigate it without a light, or I thought I could. The morning I'm describing was a Tuesday, still, cold, frost on the leaves. I was in the hollow by first light, moving to a stand I'd used a dozen times over the years, a section of creek bank where a big sycamore had fallen and created a natural blind. I was maybe a third of the way to the stand when I found the first marker. I almost missed it. A branch, roughly 3 feet long, stripped of bark, wedged into the fork of a tree at about shoulder height, horizontal. Deliberate, it hadn't fallen there. It had been placed. Parallel to the creek, pointing upstream. I stopped and looked at it. In 15 years of hunting this hollow, I had never seen anything like it in here. This was my family's private land. Nobody had permission to be here but me. I noted it and kept moving, telling myself kids from a neighboring property or a trespassing hunter who'd marked a trail and would be gone before I could deal with it. I was there to hunt. The second marker was 50 yards further upstream. Same, a strip branch, shoulder height, wedged in, a fork, horizontal, pointing the same direction. Like a trail marker, like someone was marking a route upstream along my family's creek. The third was 25 yards past that. I stopped at the third one and stood there for a long time. 3 markers in a row, consistent, recent. The wood on all of them was still white and damp looking, stripped bark fresh. Made within the last few days, made in my hollow, on my land, by someone marking a path I had never made. I didn't hunt that morning. I followed the markers instead. There were 11 of them in total, running upstream along the south bank of the creek for about 400 yards, ending at a specific location I knew well, the deep pool where the creek bent and a limestone shelf came down to the water on the far bank, a pool I'd fished as a boy. The last marker was at the edge of the pool, and at the edge of the pool, on a flat stone at the water line, were the remains of something, an animal I couldn't say what, small, nothing left but bones and fur, arranged rather than scattered, placed on the stone the way you place something you intend to be found. I stood at that pool for a long time, Then I walked back to the farmhouse and sat at my grandmother Ruth's kitchen table. I still think of it as hers, even though she's been gone 15 years. And I made coffee, and the thing I thought about was something Harlan said to me when I was about 12 years old, the first time he took me into the hollow to hunt. We were moving along the creek bank in the dark before dawn, me following the beam of his flashlight, and he stopped at the edge of the deep pool and said, without looking at me, "We don't camp in the bottom. We don't stay past dark. We come out before the light goes." I asked why. He said, "It's just how we do it here." I accepted that because he was my father and I was 12. And by the time I was old enough to ask a real question about it, the habit was already formed and I never thought to. After I found the markers, I started thinking about why. I went through Harlan's things properly for the first time that evening. I'd done a quick pass after the funeral to find what needed finding, but hadn't gone carefully. In the bottom drawer of the desk in the back room, under tax records and old maps, I found a notebook. His handwriting on the cover, B, Creek, with a range of years, 19 years worth of entries. I sat down and read it start to finish. It was a record, careful, dry, factual, the way Harlan was, the way men of that generation wrote when they wrote at all. Entries going back 19 years, noting specific things he'd found or observed in the hollow. Markers like the ones I'd found, he'd found them periodically throughout, noted each location, noted when they disappeared. The pool and the limestone shelf appearing multiple times, always as a location of significance. And entries about sounds, something he described consistently as a sound from the ridge above the hollow at dusk, which he wrote about with the specific restraint of a man who had decided what to think about something and wasn't going to revisit the decision. The last entry was dated 6 weeks before his death. It said there were fresh markers again this morning along the south bank, 7 of them. I took them down, left what I leave, and came out before dark. Has to be slayed after me. He'll need to know the agreement. The agreement. I read that word and sat with it. The agreement. Like it was a known quantity. Like it was something established and ongoing, and I was simply the next person in the line of it. I found my grandmother Ruth's recipe box, which she'd kept her private papers in for reasons I never understood. Behind the recipe cards, a folded paper in her handwriting, Ruth's neat school teacher script. A list of rules, 11 of them, titled simply, The Hollow, Don't Camp in the Bottom. Don't stay below the field line after dark. Don't take from the creek, only from the pool's edge. Leave the marked stones alone. On the last day of hunting season, leave what you take below the ridge and come up. The last line, these are Corbett's rules, his father's before him. They keep the agreement. The agreement keeps the family. My grandfather, Corbett's father, taking this back to at least the 1,920 seconds. 3 generations of my family had known there was something in that hollow. 3 generations had maintained a set of rules governing how we shared the land with it, and not one of them had told the next generation directly. They'd left notebooks and recipe boxes and half-remembered instructions, the way you leave a maintenance schedule for a house. Not explaining, just maintaining. I went back to the hollow the next morning. I took down the markers I had found the day before. I replaced them not the same way, my own markers, because I needed to understand the language of it before I could use it. I left what the rules said to leave at the edge of the pool. I came out before dark. I've hunted the hollow for 2 seasons since then. I follow the rules. I find markers sometimes. I note them. I leave them or take them down depending on what the notebook says. I've heard the sound Harlan described from the ridge at dusk twice now, both times in late November. A sound that I can only describe as something large and patient, something with a long memory, settling in for the night on the ridge above the creek. I have never seen it. My grandfather never saw it. My father never saw it. 3 generations of careful men keeping the rules and staying out of the bottom after dark, and none of them ever saw what they were keeping the rules for. I've thought about what that means. About a thing that has been on the land longer than my family has, longer probably than anyone has something old enough to warrant a set of rules that got passed down through 4 generations by people who were too careful or too afraid to explain them directly. And I've thought about what it means that the rules have worked, that the agreement has held, that my grandfather and my father and presumably my great-grandfather all lived full lives and died in beds and not in the bottom of a creek hollow. The rules work because they followed them. The notebook has a blank section at the back. New pages, no entries. Harlan left it blank because it was for me. I've been filling it in. 19 years of his observations, and now mine beside them. Same creek, same pool, same sound from the ridge at dusk. Same markers appearing and being managed. Same rules, followed without exception. My daughter is 11. She asked me last summer if she could come hunting with me this season. I said yes. I said she could come into the hollow. And I started thinking about how to tell her the rules in a way she'd actually understand, so I don't have to leave her a notebook and a recipe box and a half sentence about an agreement she's never heard of. I'm still working out how to say it, how to explain it to an 11-year-old without scaring her into never wanting to go into the woods again, and without underselling it in a way that makes a young person decide the rules don't apply to them. I remember being 12 at the edge of that pool, in the dark, following my father's flashlight, and him saying, "We don't stay past dark, we come out before the light goes." I accepted it then because I trusted him completely. She trusts me the same way. I hope that's enough. I hope she carries it the way I carry it, the way Harlan carried it, the way Corbett carried it before him. Not with fear, exactly with the specific seriousness of someone who knows that the land they walk on has a longer memory than they do, and that some things are older than the word for them, and that the agreement is the thing between the old and the human. And the agreement requires maintenance, and the maintenance requires someone who understands what they're maintaining and why. The hollow is still there, the creek still runs, the deer still come to the pool at dusk, and something still marks the south bank in November, and waits on the ridge when the light goes, and has been doing both for longer than my family has had a name for our land, or a word for what we share it with. I go in, I follow the rules, I come out before dark, that's the agreement, I intend to keep it,